computer. I got it.
Yep,
No,
got
there
it.
you go.
Phew.
Excellent.
Sorry,
Okay.
David.
No worries, guys. So I get laid off. I decide, you know what? I'm done. And I decide I'm going to write something I'd always wanted to write. I'd spent years thinking about this idea, and it's based on a true story. The actual escape by three men, Frank Morris and two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, from Alcatraz prison on June 11th, 1962. I mean, we're all fascinated by prisons, right? In Paris, everyone goes to the Bastille. In Dublin, there's a waiting list for the Gaol. And of course, the number one paid tourist attraction here in San Francisco is Alcatraz Island. It's a former military prison. And in 1933, the federal government decided, because there was this epic rise in crime during the Depression, they were going to convert the prison, the penitentiary, the military prison, into a federal penitentiary. Some funny sidebars to this. There were a whole bunch of people who were against the prison, and to show the public that the idea of siting a prison in the middle of San Francisco Bay was not really going to save people from maybe having escaped convicts, a swim team of all women swimmers went from Alcatraz to San Francisco and back in like under 2 hours.
Wow.
Now, the defenders of the prison said, oh, they were trained athletes. There's no way that a human being could survive that, a prisoner could survive that. So work continued on the prison. The place was in pretty tough shape after 70 years of use by the Army. So they added gun turrets and a lot of security measures. And eventually, there were 269 cells that got new steel bars and fencing. The guards were going to live on the island with their families. They even had a 2-lane bowling alley built for them. And in 1934, the prison was ready to open. And this is where the government sent some of our country's most vicious killers. And over the years, Machine Gun Kelly, Al Capone, Whitey Bulger, Bumpy Johnson, Robert Stroud, and Alvin Karpus, plus dozens of other prisoners who kept escaping from federal and state prisons. And that's another funny part of this story. The idea was to take habitual escape artists and put them in one place. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, the very thing that was portrayed by Clint Eastwood in this 1979 movie, Escape from Alcatraz, about this escape of those three inmates. So let's talk about the three inmates. Start with Frank Morris, who had the good fortune to be portrayed by Clint Eastwood in that 1979 movie. Unfortunately, there's no nice way to say it, but Morris had a pretty awful childhood. He was 11 years old. His parents abandoned him. He spent time in an orphanage and then in foster care, but was never adopted. And as a teenager, he was committing petty crimes and soon graduated to auto theft and armed robbery. He was sentenced to the Louisiana State Penitentiary, but he escapes, and he actually manages to stay on the lam, as they say, and for a whole year. And when he was caught, and you can assume they were pretty ticked off at him, they sent him to Alcatraz in 1960. Alan West was a car thief from New York City. He had the misfortune to be considered so insignificant to the plot of that Clint Eastwood movie that they didn't even use his real name in the picture. And I think as a measure of their disdain, they called him Charlie Butts. Anyway, the real Alan West had been sent to Alcatraz in 1957 after several attempted escapes from the prison where they had sent him. Now we have John and Clarence Anglin. And what makes their partnership with Frank so interesting is that while Frank grew up without any family, the Anglins had an abundance of it. They were among 13 children of an itinerant farm couple who followed the harvest between Florida and Michigan during the 1920s and the 1930s. When the family moved to a more permanent home in Ruskin, Florida, the boys were still antsy. They began committing petty crimes, graduated to gas stick-ups, and eventually a bank robbery. They got sent to the federal pen in Atlanta, and after several escape attempts, they ended up here in Alcatraz. Now, the irony of Alcatraz is that while it was chosen as a maximum security prison because it sat in the middle of the bay, the fact is that because it was in a salty bay with salty air, and everyone here knows salt is corrosive. And so by 1961, Alcatraz was literally falling apart. And this was the weakness that was exploited by Morris, West, and the Anglins. 4 men who'd spent countless hours trying to figure out how to get out of the prison. But they had to overcome the biggest obstacle, which was the bay itself. Because water doesn't have to be ice cold to kill you, like it did Leonardo DiCaprio's character in the Titanic. It only takes water under 70 degrees to cause hypothermia. And the temperature of the water in San Francisco Bay is usually around the 50s in June. And those temperatures, it only takes an hour or two to lose consciousness, and death follows in about 6 hours. And up until 1961, any escapees who made it to the water, who weren't captured or shot, had drowned. Oh, and here's another interesting side note. To keep the prisoners from building up a resistance to cold, the water in the prison's showers were always at a very high temperature, and there were no spigots. They couldn't make the water any colder. Now, so how do you beat hypothermia? According to the FBI, the answer was in an article in the November 1960 issue of Popular Mechanics, in which a hunter described how he used pieces of rubber to make goose decoys. To make the decoys waterproof, he used rubber cement, the kind we can all buy in any stationery or drugstore. And the chemical compound in the rubber cement fuses rubber together in a process called vulcanization. The FBI later found issues of Popular Mechanics in Frank Morris's cell because these magazines, as part of a more liberal, reform-minded warden who had taken over the prison in the late 1950s, as a chance to expand their minds and perhaps get these men on the straight and narrow. Most investigators, because of the magazine, believe it was Frank who also noticed on the other side of a metal vent at the back of every cell was a service corridor. And he used the decaying condition of the prison, chipping away at the concrete around the vent until he could remove it. Then he squeezed into the corridor and began exploring, and he shimmies up a water pipe, and he found, literally, guys, just above the cell block, this space under the roof of the prison, and that's where the 4 men created a workshop. Now, working hours had to be between lights out at 9:30 and breakfast, which was at 7 the next morning. Now, in between, the guards would patrol the blocks of cells, and they would look in on the sleeping prisoners. They rarely rousted them. In fact, with expenses at the prison rising, there were actually fewer guards on duty. But the guards are still going to notice if a man is not in his bed. So, now another irony pointed out to me by a U.S. Marshal who had worked on this case. That liberalization of Alcatraz in the 50s meant that inmates were given access to paints, brushes, and canvas. Morris, West, and the Anglins used those supplies to make paper mache fake heads, which they painted using those art supplies. They glued hair from the prison barber shop on top of the fake heads, and they put them on their pillows. Then they stuff a bunch of blankets under another blanket. So to passing guards, it looked like the men were in their beds. Okay, they got a workshop where they can build the raft. The arts program has all the rubber cement they would need. Now they just had to collect as many raincoats as possible. And here's another bit of luck for the escapees. Prisoners were used as laborers outside the prison building. And so, if you know anything about San Francisco weather, it rains a lot. So they were issued rubber raincoats. And what they would do is they would wear their raincoats out here into the exercise yard and just drop them on the ground. And then one of the four men would pick up the raincoat, put it on, and go back to his cell. And that's how the men got a very healthy supply of raincoats for the raft. So it's now early 1962. They're spending their nights in the workshop. They're building the raft. And now I'm sure you're asking the same question that the authorities did. How do you move a raft big enough for four men from the workshop up to the roof, down to the ground, and to the beach? Well, there's another clever part of the plan. They would inflate it after they got down to the beach. And they used a concertina, also known as a squeeze box, modified with a hose connected from the bellows to a corner of the raft, moving the bellows in and out, just like the Who song, and the raft would inflate. And then, just as we saw the Clint Eastwood movie, the three men got in and drifted off to San Francisco Bay. Wait a minute. Didn't Dave say there were three men building the raft? There were, but Alan West turned out to be a better mason than he should have been, because all the men were using some of that paper mache paste to cover up the chipping away around the vents. When it came time for West to leave his cell that night, the paste had hardened like concrete and he couldn't loosen the vent. The next morning, typical day at the Rock. In some ways, Alcatraz was like any other prison. The inmates followed a strict routine. A siren woke them up at 7 a.m. Prisoners were supposed to get up, wash, make their beds, and stand at attention at their cell doors. And on the morning of June 12th, the guard assigned here to B block begins to walk down the corridor, and he looks each prisoner in the eye. When he gets to cell 138, Frank is still in his cot, sleeping soundly. Now, disobedience is the surest way to get in trouble at any prison, let alone the Rock. So the guard enters the cell. He's yelling at Frank to get up, and Frank doesn't move. Now the guard takes out his baton and he pokes at Frank's body. And that's when Frank's head rolls onto the floor. It took a second for the guard to process what he was seeing, a dismembered head but no blood, before he blew his whistle to summon for help. And within minutes, two more whistles echoed down B block as the guards discovered fake heads in both John and Clarence Anglin's cells. The final count, 3 prisoners were gone. Now, during their search, they find a morose and disconsolate Alan West in his cell with his fake head and partially displaced vent cover. Wasn't too hard to figure out what happened. To help in their search, they offer Alan West a deal because trying to escape means you got a good 5-10 years added to your sentence. They promised if he told them everything he knew about the escape, not just how they did it, but where they were going, they would not tack on any more years to his sentence. So West sings like a bird, and he tells them that they're going to Angel Island, which is located just north of Alcatraz. Again, reminding me what my U.S. Marshal friend said, this is testimony from a lifelong criminal. Perhaps he was trying to throw them off the scent. But in any case, they learned all they could from Alan West. Now's another funny part of the story. Alan West was, well, he was kind of mad because during the interview process or interrogation, if you want to call it, they kept saying, okay, look, Frank was the smart one. Frank came up with the idea for the bellows, and Frank was the one who did this, and Frank came up with that. And Alan West said, you know, Frank wasn't the, I came up with all these ideas, and like modifying the guts of a vacuum cleaner to be used as an electric screwdriver, or how to collect the raincoats. That was my idea too. West is actually getting very personally hurt because Frank was getting all the credit. You know, Alan West wanted some credit in this thing. Okay. Prisoners are gone. Now the question is, what happened to Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin? Nobody except one of 3 men, for sure, really knows. We don't have many clues, and beyond a few basic incontrovertible facts, everything else is up for debate. For example, 2 days after the escape, searchers found this makeshift paddle and a waterproof package of photos, which belonged to the Anglins, floating off the southern end of Angel Island. 9 days after the escape, shreds of rubber, like the ones that they used to make prison raincoats, were found near the Golden Gate Bridge. And on June 22nd, one of the makeshift life preservers was found floating just 50 yards off of Alcatraz. On July 17th, 5 weeks after the escape, a body was seen floating about 20 miles northwest of the Golden Gate Bridge by the crew of this Norwegian freighter. The body seen by the freighter is a great example of how tough it is to get consensus from people who studied the prison break. So coroners from jurisdictions around the bay said the condition of the body, as described by the freighter's crew, was consistent with what they would have expected for a body in salt water for 5 weeks. But the coroner for San Francisco, he didn't agree with him. He even proposed another candidate, a man who had jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge just 5 days earlier. So that's it. The paddle, the package of photos, the raincoat shreds, the life preserver shreds, and the sighting by the Nordfell, the Norwegian freighter. That's it. Those are the only facts of this case that people well, there will always be someone to argue with you, but most people will agree that's pretty much all we really truly know about what happened to those 3 men. It's all conjecture. Could the men have made it to Angel Island or somewhere else on the bay? No expert will say it's impossible. They just will tell you it's highly unlikely. But if you ever watch the Mythbusters TV show, they did a whole episode on the escape, and they proved you could create a raft and sail it, paddle it all the way to Angel Island if you got just a little bit of luck on your side. And then we have a case of inmate John Paul Scott, who 6 months after Morris and the Anglins escape, he somehow gets off the island. And with the help of some water wings that he had made from a couple of gloves, rubber gloves, he made it all the way from Alcatraz to the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, once he landed at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge, there wasn't much he could do. He was suffering from hypothermia and was so exhausted he couldn't crawl, let alone run, when he was spotted by a group of teenagers and he was easily captured. But Scott presents the possibility, however small, that the men did make it. So if they did, where did they go? And why aren't there any reports of thefts of food or clothing or a car? You'd think that'd be the first thing these guys would want to go for. And so we're left with conjectures and theories and a lot of dead ends. The FBI followed up on all of them. We're left now with this one last piece of, call it evidence. It's a very tantalizing photograph. You may have seen this photo. It shows 2 middle-aged men standing on either side of a large termite mound. Now, no one can dispute the photo was taken sometime in the mid-70s, or because of that termite mound, that it was taken in Brazil. And it was sent to the Anglins by a boyhood friend of the brothers, a fellow named Fred Brizzi. Brizzi contended the men in the photo were John and Clarence. He said the boys survived their trip across the bay and wound up in Brazil, where they went straight and owned a farm. Although one marshal assigned to the case called it, quote, the best actionable lead we have, quote, he also said it could be a misdirection to throw investigators off the trail. And my U.S. Marshal friend was quick to say to me, don't forget, Brizzi was a drug smuggler and a con man, and he cast doubt on just about every part of his story. But the photo is hard to dismiss, guys. The big question is whether the 2 men in this photo are really John and Clarence Anglin. John and Clarence's nephew, Ken and David Widmer, have over the past few years been working with documentary investigators and producers to uncover the fate of their uncles in 2 different documentaries they brought this photo to computer computer companies which have AI and used facial recognition software to compare the brothers' mugshots and other photos with the men in this Brazil photo. Both times, and each time with progressive surety, the analysis was that it was a match. So there is this photo of these two men, and this may be the one real clue we have that, in fact, John and Clarence did survive their trip across the bay. But now I'd like to throw it open. I'd like to hear any theories, any speculations, and if anybody has any questions. And then I can talk to you about this, which is the novel that I wrote, which is based on the Alcatraz escape. And in my novel, all three men do survive, but it all doesn't go as planned. So, gentlemen, I'm going to throw things open. I'll bring up my chat window if anyone wants to chat a question, or, you know, we don't have that many in the room. Let's everybody who wants to has a theory or wants to ask a question, let's just speak up.
So, David, question on the gentleman in Brazil.
Yep.
Was FBI team, Brazilian government ever contacted to actually try to run them down somewhere, as far as where were they?
Well,
Were
they didn't know exactly where in Brazil it was.
I see.
I'll
And it's
tell
a
you
big
that
place.
it is it's a big country. The other the other interesting thing is, as skeptical as the U.S. Marshals are, it's still an open case, and because the men are alleged to have gone over international borders, it's an Interpol case, and
Interesting.
it is still a red notice. So when a cousin, not Ken or David, but when another cousin of the Anglins announced that he was going to go to Brazil to try to find his cousins, he was given a call by the FBI, who said, you know what? If you go to Brazil with this stated intention, you can be arrested by Interpol, and there's nothing we can do because this is an active case. So I guess the guy didn't go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anybody else have something to contribute? Question for Dave?
I mean,
Nope.
given the fact that, you know, it's been 60 years since 1962, and how old were they when they supposedly escaped? I mean, aren't they probably just dead of old age by now, even if they did get away?
Very true. Yes, but the government is not keen on saying, well, we're going to forget this after X number of years. That sets a very bad precedent. You know, like chasing Nazis. They, you know, you just they
You keep going.
the chase. Exactly.
How did that picture emerge? I didn't catch that part.
A fellow named Joseph Brizzi, who was a boyhood friend of the Anglins, sent it to the Anglin family.
Okay.
I've seen at least 2 or 3 documentaries on various television stations about this, with a lot of, not a lot, but some similar information to what.
Yeah, well, that's where I got
discussed
some
here.
of it. Sure. The
you-
Discovery Channel 2018 documentary is I think one of the best,
Yeah.
because they talk about 3 main pieces of 3 things that the nephews Ken and David wanted to resolve, and one of them was the photograph. And again, the analysis said, yeah, they sure look like the same guys.
I was just wondering if you had been contacted by any of those types of programs, you know, for any kind of documentary, since you've obviously done a lot of research on this as well.
Right, but none of my research is what's original is the fiction that I wrote, but everything else, all the facts have come from books that have written about Alcatraz, and the couple of documentaries. The Clint Eastwood movie, by the way, is really accurate. You could pick a few nits here and there about, like Patrick McGowan was terrific as the warden, but the real Olin Blackwell was not that mean. He was actually one of those reform-minded guys. And another really interesting thing is in the movie, you see Clint Eastwood stealing the nail clipper that Patrick McGowan as the warden, keeps using. And in fact, the prisoners were given those little nail clippers so that they could groom themselves. And it was those nail clippers that they used to start chipping away at the wall. So thank you, warden.
David, have you ever been out to Alcatraz?
I have. I've been out there twice. The second time was in 2011. Ironically, I was out there and we came back from Alcatraz, my family and I, and that was the day we saw on the news that they caught Whitey Bulger, which was pretty cool. And it was when I was there in 2011 that I came up with the idea for the novel, which, as I say, I was able to finally get to write once I, quote, left my last company. So this is available on Amazon, on Kindle, and in print. And the last slide I showed, you can, or I can share with the group on the groups. If you don't mind, I'll just send you the link to
That'd be
Sure.
great.
the webpage. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to present this. I love talking about it because everybody knows about this story. And there's the details of it. It's you think about it, it blows your mind that they accomplished all of this in what was supposed to be the toughest prison in the country.
If they had, instead of all the arts and crafts and the glue and everything else, if they had some type of like radio club, maybe all the prisoners would have just sat in their cells DXing and never tried to get off the island. So,
That's right. Well, it's in who's to say, back to the photograph from Brazil, if that guy was in contact with them, maybe that's a complete plant, and they were a la a Whitey Bulger, hiding in plain sight. In those days, in a pre-internet world, I mean, there was a lot more shoe leather and tipsterism that
Yep.
that was being relied on to make those types of connections to run down some people.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think if Bulger could do it in a more modern age, somebody could probably very easily pull that off in the 60s.
They just need a smarter girlfriend than Bulger had.
That's well.
I mean, I was only
She's the reason he got
7.
caught. She's the reason he got caught.
Yep. I was only 7 at the time, back in 62. And, obviously I remember the following November of 63
Yeah.
is very vivid in my mind, but I don't remember watching on the news or hearing my parents or any older relatives talking about this escape back then. Was it a big news story in 1962?
It made the
or were
front
they-
page of the Globe. I mean, it was a front page story, but there were a lot of front page stories that just, unlike the Kennedy assassination
Yeah.
or the Challenger, that sinks into that national consciousness.
Or 7 Days in May or whatever,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
Cuban
exactly. So
Missile
who,
Crisis and-
yeah, it's I mean, who knows from what whoops. Just show, there you go. Just show this again. So there you go. I mean, I don't remember it either myself, frankly. Not
it doesn't.
personally.
It doesn't seem like it was. I mean, it was probably a really big deal in San Francisco, but in
Yes.
Connecticut, it didn't seem to make any. The Bridgeport Post didn't really seem to care.
I'm sure the Long Island Newsday or the Long Island Press, where I grew up, they had it. But again, there were a lot of stories that were pretty big on the day, but they just, again.
Yeah, the Mercury program, a lot of other things.
I mean, I remember John Glenn. I mean, great thing we used to. They used
Sigma
to. I still
7 and
remember
all that stuff.
the TV on the rolling tray, and they get all the classrooms, all the first graders, the second
Yep.
graders, and they put us in, and we watch Gemini 6 and
Yep.
and Mercury and Scott Carpenter. I mean, it was what you did, right?
Yep.
Because I also remember crouching on the floor in the hallway.
Oh yeah,
as
duck
we
and cover.
practiced. Yeah, and and by the way, I put it in the book. I have there's a 13-year-old boy who's kind of the hero of the story, and I have him talking about what I experienced. Where I still remember the teacher said, "Now interlace your fingers
Yep.
and
Put 'em
place them
behind.
over your neck,
Yep.
so that." And here's a quote. So when the flying glass from the atomic explosion flies, it
Yep.
doesn't cut your jugular vein.
Right.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I'm going to sleep great tonight.
Oh yeah, no, because
I mean,
first
I'm 6 years old. What are they
because
telling me?
earlier there was like second grade or whatever, and the first thing we did was to get under our desks.
Yes.
But then
duck and
somebody got the smart idea that all of our desks were in a classroom with basically this wall of windows and all the glass that was going to be flying. And so then it was shortly thereafter that we had to leave the classroom, not get under our desk,
Mhm.
but to go out in the hallway where there
Yeah.
weren't any windows, and then do that same crouching down
Yep.
but hallway up against
Yep.
a cinder block wall, as opposed to 5 feet away glass we're going to shake. But I don't remember sleepless night. It was just like, well, okay, it's what the teacher said to do. So, you know, it was
Right.
that whoever the comedian was, it might have been George
Robert
Carlin.
Klein, who
Robert
used,
Klein, no
his routine
talking.
was, yeah,
No
and
talking during a nuclear
there's
holocaust. you know?
Holocaust. His other part of that routine was he would say, they tell you when you hear the siren, it means disaster. And then they had the foresight to blow the siren every day at noon. As you
Well, we
were
did
saying.
it. Our town was every Saturday at noon. They would
Oh,
they
really?
would blow it, yeah, to test it. Yep.
I can still hear that
And
sound.
I grew up in Monroe, Connecticut, and the next town over, Huntington, there's actually a well, now it's called a middle school. They didn't have middle school at that time, but it was, you know, you had a high school and then you had the elementary school that went all the way up to like 6th grade or something, and then junior high started in 7th. But on the grounds of the school was a Nike site.
There was a Nike base right just up the block from me. I'm in Reading.
Yep.
Down here.
Yep.
So I think it was in Burlington.
Yep.
And
So it's like, you know, great. Let's put
Yeah.
let's put our Nike missile site, you know, in the playground of the
that's
school.
where
so
the
that-
Russians are gonna go for.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
I-
Frightening. Just frightening.
I'm in Needham, Mass, and that's why the football team is the Needham Rockets, because we had a Nike site as well.
Oh, we have the Reading Rockets. So
Yes, so
let's see.
there's a trend here. Dave, I should know this, you know, being in a business that's, you know, somewhat involved in travel, but just so you've been out to Alcatraz twice now. Am I correct? Is that actually like a national park? You can take a tour.
It is. It is.
Are the
It is a-
facilities? Do they let you?
So
Is
it's
been
run by.
restored to be safe? Did you go see where these guys crashed out, or is it just more of like a museum?
No, what it is
presentation and-
it is. I cannot recommend this when you're in San Francisco. It's I think it's a private company that the National Park Service has hired to manage the tour. You still see the Park Service people on the grounds. When you get there, they give you these headphones, and I don't know, maybe now it's all Wi-Fi. But
Used to
back
be a
then
cassette, right?
yeah, it was cassettes or DV. Excuse me, it was CDs when I went. And what you hear prisoners talking, you hear guards talking. When you first walk into B block, you hear the sound of the steel doors closing behind you. And I want to tell you guys, your sphincter muscle, like, holy, it's the most frightening sound when you're looking at all these cells. It's just an amazing tour. Now, at some point during the tour, they take you out to the exercise yard, and that's where they filmed scenes from the movie, and they made a big deal about that. And it was around that time they were telling us, and this is what I used it was where I got the idea for the very beginning of the book. They said that if the wind was in the right direction, on some certain nights, the prisoners in their cells could hear the sound of music and traffic and women laughing from the nightclubs in San Francisco. And that used to drive them mad. And that's when I was standing there looking out at the San Francisco Bay, looking at the Golden Gate Bridge out in the distance. And that's when I had the idea about, coming up with this novel. So,
Fascinating.
yeah.
Well, kudos to you for acting on it. A lot of us have a lot of crazy ideas that we never do anything about.
Well,
And,
as I say, the best thing my company ever did was lay me off. Give me a little money to go away, sign a non-disclosure thing. And I said, okay, let's just finally do this. So
Sometimes it's easier when that decision, is
somebody else's.
facilitated as opposed to something you have to sit down and decide to
Yeah.
snip the cable, yourself. Kind of an interesting parallel too, though. It certainly wasn't used in, quote unquote, more modern times, but, Boston had Fort Warren on George's Island.
Mhm.
And, much the same in the story of the prisoners kept out there. And I would wonder, well, that's not that far either. I wonder if they heard the sounds
That's
of the
great.
city.
And by the way, the harbor boats that leave from where the aquarium is, George's Island is really cool because there are no gates or ropes or anything stopping you from walking into these tunnels. And these where they actually also had some where they don't have the cannons there anymore, but the places where the cannon emplacements were, you can just walk around that island and just see everything. So that George's Island is so much better than Fort Independence, Castle Island, because there's too many people telling you can't go there, can't touch that, you can't go underneath this thing. George's is, at least when I went just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the Friends of Boston Harbor have made some attempts out there. They're very concerned about the safety, but so this would go back to early 80s. We would take the boat out there and hang out for a day. We'd actually go up onto the parapets, sit in the
Yes.
sun,
Yeah, you
and
could have still
I
done
would
it 3
bring
years ago.
Sony
Yeah.
shortwave up there, put up the whip,
Of course.
see what we could pick up, and BBC was always coming in good.
Oh,
out there.
nice. Nice.
Hang out for the day and come back on the boat. But again, sort of the island prisons,
Yeah.
whether you're sent in exile or whether it's the physical prison itself, of just, prolificate throughout history.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't know if we still have any more. I mean, I guess that would be another question. Are there any other prisons on
Guantanamo
islands,
Bay,
or is that
right?
something we've
There you
long
go.
since,
That's excellent. Yeah.
long since
Gitmo.
gone off to?
By the way, Robert Stroud did most of his work on the birds at Leavenworth.
Right.
He only got transferred to Alcatraz later in his life.
Yep.
But I guess Birdman of Alcatraz sounded better than Birdman of Leavenworth.
I have a question.
Yes.
The inmates on Alcatraz, do they have access to parts they could build radios with?
No. And everything they read was censored and redacted and read by the prison officials. Every phone call was listened to, and any visitation was also monitored. So any theories about a boat being prepared to, or being near the island on the night of, it's so incredibly unlikely. They were not that. They would need Tom and his codes and ciphers to help them figure out how to get that message to and from, because I don't think it would happen.
Okay.
And the FBI certainly doesn't.
Not being that much of a mariner or a seafarer, where bodies aren't recovered. I mean, generally speaking, living in the Boston area, when somebody does, there's some accident or they're swept out or they're taken out in a current, it usually seems as if they wind up landing somewhere.
Yeah, we don't have sharks though.
Yeah.
And there are sharks in San Francisco Bay. But there's never been a body or a body part. Oh, that body that they saw, that Norwegian freighter saw on July 17th. It would have been nice if they didn't wait until October 12th to finally tell the Coast Guard. Not that, I think they would have gone and tried to rescue them. Maybe they would have gone out and tried to find the body if they had the coordinates, but they wrote it down and they kept on going on their merry way. And on their return trip, oh yeah, by the way, we saw something way back like 3 months ago. Oh, thanks for telling us.
There was more than one man. So you'd say, okay, maybe one would turn up, or, if they were washed out to sea, or.
Yeah, you'd expect that. And that's exactly. And one of the other things in that 2018 Discovery documentary, there were some bones that were found, and the contention was it could have been one of the three, but it turned out the DNA match was negative. There was no connection. Yeah.
Very interesting.
And we do have DNA now, but you're right, 60 years too late.
Well, that's why these things make good grounds for novels and good conversations.
There you go. Hey, thanks so much for letting me do this.
Sitting
This
in a
was,
San Francisco bar room somewhere.
yeah, well, yeah, and yeah. Anyway, thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Oh, we
Good, thank
appreciate
you.
we have some very talented folks in the group, and thanks for sharing. It's
No, it's my
nice
pleasure.
to kind of see what else you're interested in other than the two little Philcos you have right behind you there.
Oh, nicely noticed.
Which one of those I think is the one you posted on the Memory Station Facebook page one day? You had just finished it up. Am I
You know
correct?
what? I have a thing for transitones. I've also got one sitting up here. I don't know. It's something I just and I just
There you go. There's another one.
I think I love them. They're just, to me, they were beautiful, working class, heavy duty. You saw them in garages and diners, and they were just everywhere. And they work so well. They sound so great. So
I had one on today for a little while. So
yeah, I got one here on my desk. I'll turn it on.
Yeah, it's one of the trends I've noticed in the hobby is more and more, if you belong to different forums or groups, or, people share their stories of finds, and I find more and more people say, I brought home an AA5 or an AA6, and I hear less and less of, I brought home a Stromberg Carlson 430M 200-pound console today. I think the other nice thing, if you like to collect and maximize, what room you have, table sets and smaller sets are getting more and more
Guys,
popular.
raise your hand if you I know I go on the marketplace on Facebook and I do, but if I just go right past the floor models, I've got 5 or 6 in the house. God bless my wife. She likes Art Deco, but I don't have the room. And if I find a new tabletop that I want, I got to figure out which one I'm going to take down and sell, because I got a small cape. I don't have that much room. Anybody else have the same problem?
Well, they make nice space heaters, though, depending on the tube count.
Yeah. And my wife doesn't like turning on the heat, so I could use it.
What's the one, David, well, it's my left, looking at you on the screen. Is that an RCA? The tombstone set, the wood?
Way up there?
Down the end of your bookcase?
Oh, yeah. Is that the 7T? Hold on a second.
That's a nice radio.
I'm going to embarrass myself. I think it's an RCA. I'd have to look it up on my, I have a cheat sheet, a list of all the
That's all
radio
right. No, I was
assemblies.
just curious. It's a nice looking set.
Thank you. Yes,
well up there.
that's the one that I had to the very rare case where it wasn't just replacing the caps, the transformer, the power supply transformer. I had to replace it. That was a fun project. That moment when you hear a little sizzle?
Smells.
Yeah.
especially bad if it's one of those, well, the one that crushed me was part of a Hallicrafters set, and the power transformer had an integrated socket for the 5U4 rectifier, like as part of the transformer itself. It was
Oh,
really
I've seen
bizarre.
that. I've seen that. Yeah, yeah. Oh.
Not something easily replaced if you let it go awry. So good a good case to be made for a dim bulb tester.
Yes.
Yes, so stock up on your incandescent bulbs,
Yep.
Right.
or they'll be selling them at antique radio meets.
Yeah, it's
Guys, what
hard to make a dim bulb tester out of an LED or
Hold on, I gotta, that got me crazy now. I'm just looking at I'm really embarrassed. It's been so long since I usually
Well,
try
that was
to.
not my intent. It's a nice looking set.
No,
I'm pretty
that's
sure
okay,
it is.
man.
I think it is.
yeah, no,
They
I'm
had
I'm
several
always
of them. They had
amazed
the
that
5 tube, the
everybody
7 tube, the 10T.
It's the RCA 7T1.
Very good.
Thank you.
Case closed.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I'll mention to the group, and you know, I know we're all over the country, not necessarily just New England these days. But Dave, have you ever checked out? It's a news site, and it's a little grittier than either the Herald or the Globe. It's a site called Universal Hub.
No.
Okay, so the neat thing about Universal Hub that you will like, well, I like it because it covers a lot of my old neighborhoods where unfortunately a lot of very unfortunate things still happen in the city. So it's sort of, you know, where to go, what happens, who's getting shot. But they also have these connections with the Boston City Archives. And there was just a fascinating story about James Michael Curley running the female shoe shine trade in boot blackers off of Bromfield Street in 1917. Now, this was something that somebody actually dug into the City of Boston archives, went into the city council records, found the resolutions that Curley had filed, found statements from the city councilors, and actually had found the boot blackers were not going to be, just casually thrown out. They organized. They had a meeting in the city hall with the councilors. They also had a resolution that they wanted themselves to be protected in their trade.
Wow.
And the whole thing was kind of neat because, well, who even thought of female shoe shiners? Well, in 1917, when this occurred, there was a beginning of a male labor shortage as the draft kicked in for World War I. So women were coming out of some of their more traditional places of employment. So some of the points that the shoe shiners were making, well, it's better than working in a factory, and I don't have to work for those mean bosses. I can set my own hours and schedules. It's healthier to work outside.
Yeah,
And interestingly enough, there seemed to be a great deal of popular support in favor of them staying. And somehow the mayor, who was Curley at the time, still passed some type of a regulation to kick them out of there. But you find all of this neat Bostonia stuff. They just did a thing on, we just passed the anniversary of the Coconut Grove fire.
Yep.
And they had some neat connections. So while the news is there and there's the current information, they have a lot of great photographs of Boston.
What's it called
they
again?
do all of this stuff with the city archives. They did an extensive thing on the rail yards down in South Station and just the rail system in general. It's just some really great links to, you want to talk about rabbit holes. I guess there was a case of a locomotive in the 60s that ran wild and crossed out onto the expressway.
I have that photograph. That's right.
So if you're a Boston guy, this is the place just to, I just, keep.
That photo on a
It's no wonder
Pulitzer,
I look
by the
up,
way.
oh, it's time for bed now, but so it's Universal Hub and
Universal
it's
Hub.
sort of the side lights that they present.
Well, this
But
has
they'll
been great.
also
I'm
show
gonna look up that. I'm gonna look up Slagle's restaurant as well.
Yes.
I'm very
they show
familiar
great
with
little snippets too of
Yeah.
old Boston buildings that have survived, the massive redevelopment, little keyholes you can look in to go back to 1920 and 30.
Yeah.
And,
Unlike the
familiar
rest
with
of
the
us,
people-
you could probably get inspiration for your next novel.
Well, actually, I'm working right now. I've been dealing with the folks at the city archives because I'm doing a nonfiction book now, and I'm doing research on a baby that was abandoned on Boston Common on VJ Day. That's August 15th, 1945. and how that baby was handled, what happened to him, and how he grew up. It's really a fascinating story about Boston in that era, and then about America, because the kid grew up, he served in Vietnam, he got married, and it's a fascinating story. And so the people at the archives have been just terrific as I look into the records of the Boston Police Department, Boston City Hospital. There's a place called the Temporary Home on Chardon Street. It's just amazing, all these little pieces that fit together in the city.
I recall seeing a publication called, I think, the Back Bay Journal, which was essentially a scandal sheet that got its editorial material from the court proceedings in the Back Bay area.
Ah, huh. See, this.
It's interesting what you can find. So you go down these various roads, and my sister's done more genealogy on my family than I certainly have. But so I was doing a little research, and I found that my father was one of 13, 11 who survived in 13. Yes. So God bless grandma, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know how she did it. So my grandfather was a master plumber. His five of his sons went into the plumbing business. My father decided to go work for the Edison. He had seen more than enough plumbing to last a lifetime. But I was looking up some of my uncles, and I found that one of them actually was in a court case, and he was brought in as a sort of an expert witness in the case of somebody who was fraudulently selling solder where the components in the solder were not as advertised. And they were asking about the characteristics of how this solder would run, how it would behave. And here's my Uncle Charlie on the stand. And I had no idea that he was ever involved in this type of thing. So apparently somebody who was involved in the case said, let's get an established group of Boston. Let's get one of these guys, sort of Joe Everyman,
Yeah.
He's the expert witness. Well, I never thought of my uncle as anything but a plumber, never the expert witness. But it fitted his persona perfectly because he was one of the most well-spoken and well-read men you'd ever meet.
That's
and he must have
great.
been in his glory, So I read the testimony that he gave and all. And I said, that's him. I mean, I looked at the diction and the word, the phrase, that's him.
Yeah.
That's like, who knew,
To do this book, I've gotten very good at using ancestry and all, DNA connections, and actually working with a genealogist. We've found the mother and the father who kind of disappeared after the baby was abandoned. But it's just, you're right. I call them rabbit holes. I go down them, and hours later,
How far along are you in the new book?
About 20,000 words. So the baby was, after he left Boston City after 12 days, he was put into foster care. He was in 3 foster homes, and I found, even though everything is redacted in the department, it's used to be Department of Child Guardianship. It's now Department of DSS. But I figured out, and I found the 1st and 3rd foster homes where he was. I actually know the names of the people. I've talked to people who either were related to or lived nearby where these foster homes were, so I could talk about what it was like where the boy was when he was in foster care. And what happened was I wrote an article in 1995. I wrote an article about the 50th anniversary of VJ Day. I had seen stories about this baby on the front page of all these newspapers, but I didn't have enough room to talk about him in that article. 10 years later, on the 60th anniversary, I wrote another story for the Globe about this abandoned baby. And I finished the story with something like, if he's alive today, he'd be 60 years old, and hopefully he's reading this and he'll come forward, or something like that. And nothing happened. But 3 years later, I get a phone call from a woman in Chicago. She's studying to be a chef, and she was doing some online research, and she went down a rabbit hole, Paul, and she found my article. And she calls me up and she says, that was my father. And
She found bugs.
she found me through the art, and the two of us have become friends, and we're writing this book
Very
together.
interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So,
So, David, I have some temerity, never having written anything other than some bad college papers, but I'm going to give you a suggestion for your next work. So,
okay.
I want you to take this one on. We want the definitive story behind the story as to whether shortwave bands on radios were disabled by technicians for folks of who had a dubious, had their American citizenship or their loyalty to the states questioned during World War II.
Hmm.
If you've ever read these stories, occasionally you see them. And we just had one in Raven, an issue or so ago. A fellow, John, had written us a story. He's out in the Midwest. And there have been people who report that they've found a nice radio, 2-band, 3-band set. And he, at one point, actually found a tag that showed that the shortwave bands were disabled on this particular set. And apparently, from what I've understood, and this has been on Antique Radio Forum, it's been bandied about for years, did in fact, if you were, say, for example, of German heritage or Italian heritage, Japanese heritage, that somehow was there, and nobody has really come up with any type of a formal document or directive from the government per se that would direct someone in the radio servicing field to disable these sets. But yet it keeps coming up time and time again. You see this sort of peripheral evidence, and it almost goes to the point that, is there a grain of truth somewhere?
I
But
know
yet
someone who might. I know somebody who might. I don't know if you've ever read anything by Donna Halper.
Yes.
She's written a number of.
I've interviewed her once.
Oh,
yes.
okay. So
I know Donna.
She's
into that stuff.
She's prolific. I'll ask her.
You ask her. You tell her I wanted to know.
I'll give you her
and
name,
then you want to
Paul.
write the book.
No, I don't want to write that book.
You don't wanna
I'll
write
leave that
book.
to Donna. Anyway.
But it's one of those interesting questions from that period.
Yeah. I mean, we know that we hams were not allowed to broadcast during those years. In fact, it's funny. I found this great. If I could, it was a article, and the article, it just said, hams can't call CQ. Let me see if I can find it. I'll share it. It's terrific. See.
It was was it a World War emergency radio service? I think it was up around 2 meters.
I'm not sure. I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah, neither could I. I don't.
Of course, I'm surprised Tom Pereira never got picked up as a kid running wires out of apartment buildings over parks. And
never mind that. All that code
surveillance.
equipment. Yep.
Yeah, they got me, Paul. They when I was flashing Morse code to a friend across Central Park, the neighbors turned me in, and the police made a simultaneous raid on my and my buddy's apartments.
I was always a suspect in my neighborhood because I was always very interested in astronomy, and I had a couple of telescopes, and then obviously I was into shortwave for a while, so I was up on the hip roof, and I was up in trees with wires and lines and telescopes out late at night, odd hours. What's he doing out there? I'm sure the neighbors. I never got picked up though, surprisingly. So we did get questioned once coming out of a meadow up in the Blue Hills at around 3 a.m. by some police. But when we started loading in this large reflector telescope into the trunk of the car, they wrote us off as, obviously a couple of nuts, because who else would be out in this type of weather?
Guys, I found the article. There it is.
Nice going.
This is
Hams
from the
can't
August 19th, 1945 Boston Globe. And there you go. I love, they use all of the QRM came from Uncle Sam's Radio Intelligence Division. Isn't this wonderful? Look at that.
The Board of War Communications announced last Friday that it has no objections to the reactivation of amateur operation in the 112 to 115.5 megacycle band for a period of 90 days.
You got it.
Wonderful.
Uncle Sam's Radio Intelligence Division. I wonder if that's another one of those oxymorons.
Well, let's not go there.
Interesting
Yeah, I
stuff.
thought you guys would appreciate that.
General Ike asks censorship to end. Well,
Yeah,
old newspapers are extremely
fascinating.
interesting
Yes,
sometimes.
they're
Kind of take the pulse of the popular current of thought at the time,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Here's
the
a reference.
textbooks written by the academics.
Here's a reference to that War Emergency Service in the 43 handbook.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But that's an interesting idea, Paul, about the radios being disabled. You think if the Germans or the Japanese or the Italians were sending over spies, they'd be smart enough to be able to re-enable the shortwave band.
Well, these would be, the fifth columnists, the
fighters.
nice little old lady who lived down the street,
Yeah.
who'd bake you some strudel, but was secretly, notifying all of the
Like
underground
Hogan's Zeros, she's
activities.
got a secret transmitter in the bunt cake.
Yes, that's
Anyway,
right.
guys, I got to run. Thank you so much.
David,
This has been
thanks for
really
coming
fun.
by. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you. Thank you, everybody.
That's
We'll
great.
see you.
Have a great
Be
night.
well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, we have some great members who do some many interesting things other than restore and admire and listen to radio. So if anybody has a story they would like to share of something else they do, if it's to the general interest, let the Zoom group know. Don't really have anything in the way of club announcements or club business. However, it seems as if Larry is kind of winding down his term as president. So he sent out a few different emails the last few days, thanking folks and encouraging people to get involved in some of the different events. And as we start to cruise into the next year. So if anybody does have an interest in doing a little bit more than we're doing, Bob Harris is your man. So I know he's looking to build upon what we've done and has some interesting ideas and is very, very keen on listening to people's suggestions. I've had a couple of different phone calls with him, and he's available. Will be available, I'm sure, at the next show if you want to bend his ear. If there's something you think we should be doing or shouldn't be doing or should be doing better or worse, let us know. Did it snow in Hancock today, Tom?
Let me see. Yes, it sure did.
Yeah, it is very cold up there, as I can
Yeah.
tell from your
Yeah.
sweater. Yeah, it's a little chilly down here tonight.
Yeah, we should all remember the next meeting's going to be on the 15th, next Zoom meeting.
Yes. And it'll be our wrap up for the year. And if you have anything you'd like to show us that you're working on, or you've got a winter project that's going on the bench, something you'll be spending those long, quiet nights on, bring it along and share it with the group. So I'm all set on my end, Tom, if you don't have anything
Yeah.
further on yours.
Anybody else have anything they want to share with the group?
Yeah, I posted a giveaway on.
Yes, I saw it in the NEVEC, yes.
Basically, it's a batch of assorted radios that I'm just not going to have time to restore. And the criterion is take the whole batch for free. And that's my way of saying, okay, maybe there's some new people out there that might be interested in learning about radio restoration, or that may be in the interest of the club to pick up the whole batch and possibly sell that at the next flea market. But whoever gets there first and wants it and goes
Well,
by.
why don't we see what happens with that? And if you have a taker, great. If not, let us know, and we can bring that up as possible. Maybe we could do like I know some clubs will do they'll do an auction to benefit the coffers of the club.
Great.
And it need not be a fancy one, but we could perhaps do something after one of the meets.
I just want these radios to be rehomed in the very near future.
Well, that's a noble goal.
So,
And so if you know of anybody, folks who are attending who might be in the hunt or looking to add to their collection, let them know, have them check the IO group. So I guess about half of our club membership is in the group, which is good. It's growing, and the conversation patterns are increasing, and it's becoming a bit more of a forum for all types of good communication. So hopefully we can kind of build on that too. But if you've got some interest, let Brad know. Other than that, I'm going to hit the road. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Wonderful job at the controls. And we'll put this up. This was a nice diversion from some of our standard discussions, but I thought it was a neat presentation. David's an interesting character. We appreciate him.
Very, very interesting.
All right. Have a great night. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.